The sign outside read Pendleton County Sheriff's Impound and Asset Liquidation, open to public. It sounded bureaucratic. It sounded routine. It was neither of those things. Leigh Donovan had driven 4 hours from Knoxville to get there. She hadn't told anyone she was coming. Not her aunt, not her father's old unit, not the victim's advocate from the VA, who still sent her emails she never opened. She had just filled up the tank, put the address into her phone, and driven west through the dark until the sun came up and the Tennessee hills flattened into something she didn't recognize. She was 26 years old, and she had never been to an auction in her life. The parking lot was already half full when she arrived. Pickup trucks, a few unmarked fleet vehicles with government plates, a white cargo van that belonged to a private security company out of Louisville. She'd looked them up the night before, lying on the motel mattress, staring at the ceiling. K9 Solutions LLC. They contracted retired military and law enforcement working dogs for private security deployment, warehouses, shipping facilities, industrial sites. That was why she was here. The building itself was a converted agricultural warehouse on the edge of a county fairground. High corrugated metal walls, concrete floor, a row of folding tables along one side where a bored-looking county employee was checking IDs and handing out numbered bidding paddles. The air smelled like hay and something underneath it, motor oil. Or maybe it was just age, the smell of a building that had been used for too many things over too many years. Leigh stood in line and held her registration confirmation on her phone. She had paid the $50 deposit online at 1 a.m. She had $3,400 in a cashier's check, folded inside the inner pocket of her jacket. That was almost everything she had in her savings account. The man in front of her turned around and looked at her the way men at these things always looked at women who showed up alone. Not threatening, just assessing, figuring out whether she was a buyer or somebody's wife. She looked straight through him until he turned back around. The county employee, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, took Leigh's ID, glanced at it, glanced at Leigh, and handed her paddle number 17 without a word. There were 32 lots on the auction sheet. Retired law enforcement vehicles, evidence room equipment, a drone, 3 horses from a narcotic seizure that had been living on county property for 8 months. And at the bottom of the list, 3 retired working dogs from the Sheriff's Department's K9 unit, which was being restructured under a budget consolidation. Lot 30, Lot 31, Lot 32. Leigh had read the listings so many times she could recite them from memory. Lot 32, male Belgian Malinois, approx. 7 years, certified in patrol, suspect apprehension, and explosive detection. Retired from active service, March 2026, due to handler separation, no known health conditions, behavioral assessment, not recommended for civilian adoption. Current placement, county holding facility, handler separation. That was what they called it when a handler died in the line of duty. Handler separation, like he had simply been transferred to another department, like he had put in for a different assignment and the paperwork had come through. Her father, Sergeant First Class David Donovan, had died 18 months ago during a training accident at a special operations support facility outside of Raleigh. He wasn't deployed. He wasn't in a combat zone. He was running a certification exercise on a Tuesday morning in October, and a vehicle rollover happened and he didn't come home. There was no dramatic story to it. There rarely was. But Ajax had been with him that morning. Ajax had been with him every morning for 4 years, and now Ajax was lot 32. The auction started at 9. Leigh sat in the 3rd row of folding chairs and watched the first 29 lots move through with the grinding efficiency of county government, methodical, impersonal, occasionally contentious when 2 bidders wanted the same retired Ford Interceptor. The auctioneer was a compact man named Gerald Fitch who wore a bolo tie and read each lot number like he was calling a football play. She barely heard any of it. She kept looking at the door to the left of the staging area. the one that led back to the holding area. Behind that door, she knew, were kennels, and in one of those kennels was a 78-pound Belgian Malinois who had slept in the same building as her father for 4 years, who had ridden in the same truck, who her father had talked about in phone calls home the way some men talk about a best friend. Not with sentimentality, but with the quiet assumption that the other person simply understood something important about the world. Ajax figured it out before I did, her father had said once. They had been talking about nothing in particular, some story about a training exercise gone sideways. He always does. That dog thinks 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. She had laughed at that. She hadn't thought much about it at the time. She was thinking about it now. Lots 30 and 31 went quickly. A Belgian Malinois female to a canine training facility in Ohio. A German Shepherd male, older, calmer, to a man in a Carhartt jacket who said he had a farm and a cattle operation, and the dog was going to retire properly, and he said it with enough conviction that the room almost believed him. Then Gerald Fitch shuffled his papers and looked up. Lot 32, he said. Belgian Malinois, male, approximately 7 years of age, retired from the Pendleton County Sheriff's K9 unit. We'll need the handlers to bring him out, so bear with us a moment. The door to the left opened. 2 handlers came through first, both in Sheriff's Department uniforms, both holding catch poles, the long aluminum poles with cable loops at the end, used for dogs that couldn't be safely leashed in the conventional way. Their posture said everything. Shoulders squared, weight distributed, ready. Then Ajax came through the door. He was not what most people in that room expected. He was lean in the way that working dogs are lean. Not thin, but absolutely without excess, every ounce of him in service of something functional. His coat was the standard Malinois sable, fawn and black, but there was a long pale scar running from his left shoulder down toward his front leg. Healed over completely, but visible in the way old things always are. His ears were up, his eyes were moving. He was not pulling against the catch poles. He was not lunging. He was simply reading the room with a precision that was almost uncomfortable to watch. The slow, systematic scan of an animal that had been trained to assess threat, and was doing so now automatically, because that was what he knew how to do. The room got quieter, not silent, but quieter. The man from K9 Solutions, who had been on his phone for most of the auction, put the phone in his pocket and leaned forward. Behavioral assessment on this one indicates he's not a candidate for civilian placement, Gerald Fitch said, reading from the sheet. He's been in county holding since March. He's had some adjustment difficulty. One of the handlers shifted his weight. The other kept both hands firmly on the catch pole. Ajax had stopped moving. He was standing in the center of the staging area, and he was looking at the room, not at any one person, but at the room itself, cataloging it. His tail was low, not tucked, just low. We'll open bidding at 500, Gerald said. 500, said the man from K9 Solutions, without hesitation. 8, said someone in the back. 1,000. The K9 Solutions man again. He wasn't even looking at the dog. He was looking at his phone, which he'd taken back out. Leigh sat very still with paddle 17 in her lap. She had told herself on the drive down that she would be strategic, that she would wait, stay calm, not show her hand. She had rehearsed it. 1,200, she said, and raised her paddle. Several people turned to look at her. She kept her eyes on Gerald Fitch. 1,200 to the young lady in the 3rd row, Gerald said. Do I hear 14? 14, said K9 Solutions. 16, said Leigh. The man turned and looked at her then. He was perhaps 50, grey at the temples, wearing a polo shirt with his company's logo embroidered on the chest. He had the look of someone who had been surprised exactly once in his adult life and had decided never to let it happen again. 2,000, he said. There was a small murmur in the room. Leigh did the math. She had $3,400. If she went to $3,000, she would have $400 left. She had a full tank of gas. She had paid for the motel room in advance. 2,200, she said. It went back and forth 4 more times. The K9 Solutions man had the expressionless efficiency of someone spending company money. Each bid came without hesitation, without calculation, because the calculation had already been done somewhere else by someone else, and he was simply executing it. At $3,200, Leigh raised her paddle and said $3,200, and her voice came out steadier than she felt. The K9 Solutions man looked at her. He looked at the dog. He looked back at his phone. 34, he said. Leigh's cashier's check was for $3,400. She sat with paddle 17 in her lap, and she did not raise it. Gerald Fitch started his count. 3,400 going once. She was staring at the floor. The concrete was cracked in a long diagonal line from the staging area toward the far wall, and she followed it with her eyes because she needed to look at something that wasn't Ajax. Because if she looked at Ajax, she was going to do something she hadn't planned. Going twice. "Excuse me," she said. She stood up. Gerald Fitch stopped. The room went quiet. She wasn't sure what she had intended to say. She had no more money. She had no argument. She was a 26-year-old woman from Knoxville standing in a county warehouse in the middle of nowhere holding a numbered paddle, and she had run out of cashier's check. But she was already standing, and the room was already looking at her, and Ajax had turned his head. Not at the sound of a chair scraping, not at the movement, at something else. He had been scanning the room since they brought him out, that slow, systematic red, and he had reached her, and he had stopped. She didn't know that she was going to say it until she said it. "His name is Ajax," she said. "He served 4 years with my father, Sergeant First Class David Donovan, out of Fort Bragg. My father died 18 months ago, and no one contacted us. No one told us this dog was being auctioned. I found out because I was going through my father's service records, and I found Ajax's registration papers in a folder, and I looked up what happened to him." She stopped. She was not going to cry. She had decided that in the parking lot. "I'm not trying to cause a problem," she said. "I just wanted to say his name. I thought someone in this room should know his name before he gets sold." The room was very quiet. Ajax was not moving. He was standing exactly where he had been standing, between the 2 handlers with their catchpoles, and he was looking at Leigh with an attention that was different from the systematic scan he had been doing before. His ears, which had been rotating independently, processing the ambient sound of the room, had gone still. Gerald Fitch took off his reading glasses and held them in both hands. The K9 Solutions man was looking at his phone. A woman in the second row, older, silver-haired, who had bought Lot 19, a retired patrol unit Tahoe, turned and looked at Leigh and then looked at the man from K9 Solutions and made a sound that wasn't quite a word. It was Gerald Fitch who spoke first. "Miss," he said, "what did you say his name was?" Leigh said, and at the sound of it, the second time, in that room from her voice, the dog sat down, not because he was commanded to. The handlers had not moved, neither of them had said a word. Ajax simply sat down, the way a dog sits when it has heard something it was waiting to hear, and has decided at last to stop bracing. One of the handlers looked at the other. The K9 Solutions man finally put his phone away. What happened next did not happen the way things happen in movies. There was no dramatic reversal, no speech, no moment where a crowd of strangers rose to their feet. What happened was slower and stranger than that. Gerald Fitch set down his papers and said he needed 5 minutes, and he went through the door to the left, and the 2 handlers stood with Ajax in the staging area, and nobody bid, and nobody talked very much, and Leigh sat back down in her chair because her legs had decided that was enough. Ajax did not take his eyes off her. A man in the front row, bearded, 50s, wearing a VFW cap, turned around and looked at her and said, "Fort Bragg." "What unit?" she told him. He nodded slowly, the way people nod when they're translating information into a context that means something to them. "I knew guys who worked with that unit," he said. "Good outfit." She nodded back. The woman with the silver hair leaned over from the second row and touched Leigh's arm, just briefly, and didn't say anything. After 4 minutes and 30 seconds, she was watching the clock on the wall because she needed something to do. Gerald Fitch came back through the door. He was followed by a man in a sheriff's department uniform with a major's insignia on his collar, Major Dennis Albright, whose nameplate she read when he got close enough. Major Albright stopped in front of Leigh. He looked at her for a moment. Then he looked at Ajax. Ajax had not moved. "Miss Donovan," Major Albright said, "can I ask you to come with me for a minute?" The office behind the staging area was small and smelled like coffee and toner. There was a metal desk and a wall of filing cabinets and a window that looked out onto the fairground parking lot. Major Albright sat on the edge of the desk. Gerald Fitch stood near the door with his arms crossed and the expression of a man who had seen a lot of auctions and not many like this one. "The dog's been in our holding facility since March," Major Albright said. 7 months. He hasn't been adoptable. He's too well trained for civilian placement. The liability is significant, and our K9 program restructuring didn't include a protocol for situations like his handler separation, Leigh said. Major Albright looked at her steadily. "Yes, what's K9 Solutions going to do with him? Guard work. Industrial. It's not a bad life for a working dog." He said it carefully, like a man who had told himself the same thing several times and was not entirely sure he believed it. "He was certified in explosive detection," Leigh said. "My father worked him on 3 overseas deployments before they were both reassigned stateside. Ajax has a commendation from a joint task force exercise in 2022. You're going to put him on a chain outside a shipping container." Major Albright said nothing. "I have a cashier's check for $3,400, Leigh said. "That's everything I have. I know it's not the winning bid. I know I don't have the money to outbid them." She reached into her jacket and put the check on the desk. "But I'm asking you to tell me if there's another way." Major Albright looked at the check. He looked at the window. He looked at Gerald Fitch. Gerald Fitch unfolded his arms. "The buyer from K9 Solutions has to countersign the transfer paperwork before it's finalized," Gerald said. He said it slowly, like he was thinking out loud. "That hasn't happened yet. The auction result isn't legally binding until the paperwork's complete." Major Albright picked up the phone on the desk. She waited in the office for 22 minutes. She could hear voices in the staging area, not clearly enough to follow, just the cadence of a conversation that was negotiated rather than decided. At one point, she heard a door open and close. At another point, she heard Ajax, not barking, but a single sharp sound, something between a bark and a grunt, the sound a dog makes when it wants to register an opinion without fully committing to it. She almost smiled. When Major Albright came back, he was alone. "K9 Solutions is withdrawing their bid," he said. He sat down heavily in the desk chair. "They're not happy about it. I'll be getting a call from their legal department." He picked up the cashier's check and held it for a moment, then set it back on the desk facing her. "We're not going to take your money, Miss Donovan." She stared at him. "Your father served 4 years with that dog," Major Albright said. "Ajax has 11 commendations in his service record, 3 overseas deployments and 4 years of stateside duty, and not one negative incident report from any handler he worked with." He folded his hands on the desk. "The least this county can do is transfer him to the family of the man he served with. That's not a sale, that's a placement." Leigh looked at the check on the desk. She had looked at that number, $3,400, so many times in the past 2 weeks that it had stopped feeling like money and started feeling like a verdict about what she was willing to do. "There will be paperwork," Major Albright said. "There will be a home visit assessment from our Animal Control Division, standard for any K9 placement. You'll need to demonstrate that you have appropriate space and a basic understanding of working dog management." He paused. "Do you have a yard?" "My aunt does," Leigh said. "I'm staying with her. She has 2 acres outside Knoxville." He nodded. "That'll do." They brought Ajax into the office. The handler, a younger deputy named Keene, who had been on the K9 unit for 2 years and had clearly developed his own relationship with the dog during the 7 months of holding, came in first and unclipped the catch pole. Ajax was on a standard lead now. He came through the door and immediately scanned the room. Then he found her. He crossed the office in 4 steps, which was all the room there was, and he put his nose against her hand, and then he lifted his head and looked at her. His eyes were amber, the particular amber of working Malinois, pale enough to catch the light from the window. She didn't say anything. She didn't reach out to pet him, not yet, because she knew enough about working dogs to know that you let them decide what the moment is. Ajax decided. He put his head against her ribs, just below her left shoulder, and he exhaled, a long, slow breath, the kind that comes from somewhere deep, the kind that takes a long time to come out. Deputy Keene, standing by the door, looked at the window. Major Albright looked at his folded hands. Leigh put her hand on the back of Ajax's neck, between his shoulder blades, where her father had probably put his hand 1,000 times, and she didn't move, and neither did he. The paperwork took another hour and 15 minutes. Gerald Fitch's assistant brought her a cup of coffee she didn't drink. Someone from the Sheriff's Department Animal Control Division came and asked her several questions about her living situation, her experience with dogs, her understanding of working dog behavior. She answered everything honestly, including the part where she said she had never personally handled a military working dog, but she had grown up around her father's unit, and she had been watching videos on Malinois management for 2 weeks. The animal control officer, a woman named Sykes, practical and thorough, looked at Ajax while Leigh was talking. Ajax was sitting next to Leigh's chair, not pressed against her, not anxious, just present. Officer Sykes made a note on her clipboard. "He's already decided," she said, not unkindly. "That makes this easier." When everything was signed, when the transfer documentation was complete and the county had formally relinquished custody, and the cashier's check was still in Leigh's jacket because Major Albright had refused to take it twice more, she walked out through the staging area, which was empty now except for a few people stacking folding chairs, and she went through the main doors and out into the parking lot. The sun was directly overhead. It was warm for late November. A hawk was doing long, slow circles above the fairground. Ajax walked beside her, not on the lead. She had the lead, but it was slack, hanging between them like a formality. She opened the rear door of her car, and he jumped in without being asked, turned twice in the back seat, and lay down. She stood with her hand on the door for a moment. Her father had driven this car once. 3 Christmases ago, when he was home on leave, he had driven her to the airport in it, because she was flying back after the holiday and he had an early morning the next day and it was easier, he'd said. He didn't mind. They had talked the whole way, about nothing important, about a podcast he was listening to, and a book she was trying to read, and the traffic on I-40. She couldn't remember most of it now. She remembered the way the dashboard lights looked, and the fact that he'd had the heat on too high, and she had put her window down an inch, and he'd given her a look but not said anything. She closed the rear door. She got in the driver's seat. In the rearview mirror, Ajax's amber eyes were already closed. The drive back to Knoxville took 4 hours and 20 minutes. Ajax slept for most of it, shifting occasionally, once lifting his head to look out the window at nothing Leigh could identify, then settling back down. She stopped once for gas outside of Cookville. Ajax got out and stretched, and walked a careful perimeter around the car, checking the edges of things, and then got back in. She had called her aunt from the parking lot of the auction house. Her aunt, Carol, who was 58, and had known Leigh's father since they were children, and had never entirely recovered from his death in the way that sisters don't, had listened to the whole story in silence and then said, "Bring him home," and that had been the entire conversation. By the time Leigh pulled onto her aunt's gravel drive, the sun was going down behind the ridge, and the air had that particular autumn smell of wood smoke and cold coming. Carol was standing on the porch. She watched Leigh get out of the car. She watched the rear door open. She watched Ajax step out onto the gravel and stand in the failing light. He turned his head toward the ridge, ears up, reading the wind, reading whatever a dog reads when it's standing in a new place trying to decide if it's safe. Then he turned and looked at Carol. Carol put her hand over her mouth, because she had known Leigh's father for 50 years, and she had heard about Ajax for 4 of them, and she was seeing now what Leigh had understood in that office in the county warehouse, that this dog carried something forward, that he was the last living creature on earth who had spent every day for 4 years in David Donovan's presence, who knew the particular sound of his voice, and the particular pace of his walk, and the particular way he carried himself through the world. Ajax crossed the gravel and stood in front of Carol, and he looked at her with those pale amber eyes, and he did not bark, and he did not pull back. He simply looked, with the seriousness of an animal that understands more than it can say. Carol lowered herself slowly to the porch step and put both hands on either side of his face. "Hello," she said. "I know who you are." That night, after Carol had gone to bed, Leigh sat on the back porch with a blanket and a cup of tea that went cold. The yard behind the house ran down to a tree line, nothing but dark and the sound of the creek somewhere in the trees. Ajax sat beside her chair, not curled up, sitting upright, oriented toward the tree line, doing the thing he had always done, the thing he would probably always do, watching the edge of things, making sure the perimeter held. She thought about the man from K9 Solutions who had looked at Ajax and seen an asset. She thought about Gerald Fitch reading lot numbers off a sheet. She thought about the way the room had gone quiet when Ajax sat down, not because anyone commanded it, but because something had happened that didn't have a clean explanation, and people in the presence of unexplained things tend to go quiet. She thought about her father saying that dog thinks 3 steps ahead of everyone in the room. She thought about the folder she had found in the cardboard box of service records her father's unit had sent after he died. The folder had been mislabeled, wedged between performance reviews and training logs. She had almost thrown it away. Inside was Ajax's registration documentation, his commendation records, and a single photograph, her father kneeling beside Ajax somewhere dry and flat and far away, both of them squinting against the light. She had that photograph in her bag. She had carried it with her to the auction, and she had not shown it to anyone, and she was not sure why. Maybe because it wasn't evidence of anything. Maybe because it was only for her. Ajax shifted beside her chair. He stretched his neck out toward the tree line, held it a moment, then pulled back and settled. He was not pacing. He was not restless with the particular restlessness she had read about, the anxiety of a working dog with no work, a dog that had been waiting for 7 months in a county holding facility for something it couldn't name. He was watching, because watching was what he knew how to do, and because somewhere in the logic of a dog's understanding of the world, this was a thing worth watching over. This yard, this porch, this woman with her cold tea and her blanket, the last member of the only family he had ever had. It was not the life he had trained for. The life he had trained for was gone, and both of them knew it, and neither of them needed to say so. But he was here, and she was here, and the tree line held its dark and quiet edge, and Ajax watched it steadily, patient as he had always been, standing guard over what remained.